Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hello and welcome back to the show. My guest today is Louise Hart, an international specialist in governance and procurement, also a best-selling author about procuring successful mega projects. You will find a link to that book in the show notes. This is the third and last part of our conversation, and all I can say is I hope you learn a lot and please enjoy. Hi, this is Doc Frank, and before we get into the podcast, I want to quickly tell you about ONO, O-N-O. In case you don't know what it means, here in Australia it means or nearest offer, and that means that a price for a certain thing is negotiable. So how does it work and how may that be of interest to you? If you're interested in training or education on advanced modern signaling or the capacity increase of railways, then please do step 1 up here and check out my training portal docfranktraining.podia.com. You will find a globally unique collection of training offers that you can't find anywhere else. If you do, let me know. I'm always happy to learn. There are courses about the blueprint for high capacity signaling, the mindset for high capacity railways, and of course the flagship CBTC training that has been the longest running CBTC training in the world, even though it's been regularly updated. If you have found anything that's of interest to you, then we come to step number 2. You look at the regular price. If you think that's fair, that's good, then just procure the training and enjoy. I'm happy with that. If you want to save a few bucks, then send me an email to training@docfrank.com.au. And in that email, let me know which training or conference recording you are interested in and what is the price that you want to pay for it. And if I consider your offer reasonable, if it makes sense for me, I will accept it. Otherwise, I will let you know, and maybe we have a little negotiation along the way as well. And then you have the opportunity to enjoy world-class training on signaling at prices that are below the nominal package. So I think it's a good offer. It won't last forever. The current intent is to keep it running to the end of this calendar year, 2024. So don't wait to the last minute. Check out my training portal. And if you find something, then send me an email and let's negotiate. But now, please enjoy the upcoming podcast episode. I had quite good experiences with peer review groups, which were again only used in a part-time capacity, say for a workshop once every quarter or once every 6 months or something like that. But basically having a small group of really high caliber experts. Or another example that was the review that we did, the business case review, which all up didn't take more than a week, with 3 people in the team. So for an effort of 3 man weeks, I thought the New South Wales government at the time got a very insightful feedback on where the project stood and what the potential issues are, or which direction should be encouraged, which other directions maybe not so much. So what I'm saying is that if you do it intelligently, you can get a lot of value for a relatively modest amount of time and money that you need to spend with the right experts.
Indeed, and the gateway process is very good for that. In New South Wales, they've added to the standard 6 gates or whatever it is in the gateway. They've got what they call deep dives, which a project can ask for when they've got some particular issue that needs attention, and they can have what is gateway style methodology, but focusing down on a particular aspect of the project. And I think those are very good. And I've occasionally made use of gateway methodology in just doing one-off project reviews for a client, because they're pretty good. And particularly if you can get together 2 or 3 people with different sets of expertise to bring to bear on it. I think they can be very good value. You can't put too much on them. It can only ever be a snapshot, but it often adds a lot of value, I think.
Yeah, and be it just a confirmation that things are going in the right direction. Yeah. They did something like this, or they were trying something like this in Melbourne a few years ago by installing an panel of international experts that were meant to help projects in distress. And I was fortunate or privileged to be on that panel for a period of 3 years, during which I think that panel was never used once. So yeah, so that's where a good idea really goes to waste by just not implementing it, and apparently that seems to be different in Sydney. So kudos to them for that. Not just having a good idea, but actually implementing that good idea as well. Number 4 on the list: identify the scope, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's particularly critical for transport projects, because, and particularly when your project is an addition to an existing railway rather than building something greenfield, because the complexities of the transition from construction to operation can be very significant indeed. I mean, you introduce a new train, you've got to train the drivers, and if you're in Sydney, you've got to train the guards as well. You've got to rejig the timetable to cope with the fact that you've got new trains with different acceleration and braking characteristics. You're probably maintaining them somewhere different, so you've also got to rewrite the working timetable. You've got different sets of expertise. There's a whole load of stuff that needs to be in place in order to flick the switch and start the thing going. And very often, the scope of work that you give to the contractor is pretty much matched by the scope of work that the client has to undertake in order to make the railway ready to accept the new addition. And if you don't identify that scope up front, you're in trouble. I mean, one of the common things with trains is having to adjust perhaps the positioning of the platform or other infrastructure to cope with a slightly different kinetic envelope. If you don't think of that in advance, you get embarrassing headlines about trains not fitting beside platforms. And usually that kind of headline doesn't mean that they hadn't noticed. It just means that the project to shave a bit off the platforms was running a long way behind the project to deliver the train. But, you've got to coordinate all those things. And if you don't identify it up front, it's a real problem.
Yeah. You mentioned elsewhere in the book that if you don't know the scope, you don't know the schedule either. And I might add to that, and you don't know the budget as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I mean, one example here in Australia, a recent one, which I have stressed a few times already on the podcast, is Inland Rail, where they had this audit coming back in a quite devastated way that not only has the budget increased by a factor of 3 compared to the originally published budget by the federal government, but it's basically a moving target. So the auditor couldn't be sure, or said she wasn't certain that the current budget given, which was already 3 times as high, would really be the final figure, or whether it would keep going up. And then you look a bit more into the details, and then you say, okay, well, I've got a railway line from here to here, but here and here is not really clear, other than the one side will be somewhere in Melbourne and the other side will be somewhere in or near Brisbane. And even years after the project is already in progress, this is still being discussed. This is still being sorted out, because especially on the Queensland end, there are huge debates where that line should go. Maybe they have found a solution now, but I was just wondering how a project like this can at all start and advance so far without some basic parameters not being clear. And yeah, and the procurement process, I mean, you can certainly say, okay, well, we've got a piece in the middle, and that piece is certain, so we can do the procurement for this, which kind of they did for Inland Rail. I mean, that they basically cut it up into various smaller parts. And some of those parts were quite well advanced because they apparently were clearer than the rest of the project. But looking at the entire point of building a railway line from A to B, when you're not clear what A is exactly and what B is exactly and where it is, I was just wondering how you can ever come up with a credible budget schedule. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is that it's not credible.
Yeah. But again, then you look at the people involved, both in the project management and in the government, and that reminds me of your previous point in this conversation, that it's often the smart people that come up with something where you look at it and said, that wasn't that smart. How can you do that? Yeah, because of, I don't know, external pressures, to make things happen, to show some progress, or what have you. Yeah. Number 5 is another good one. Allocate risk to people who know what to do with it. I mean, obviously you relate this to procurement, but I just look at the wider picture of risk management generally in projects during delivery, and I thought that's really, really good. I mean, it seems so obvious, but I don't think you would have put it in if it was really that obvious and everybody would do it.
Yeah, well, the classic is that too often the government side tries to deal with risk by just shoving it all off onto the contractor. And sometimes I think they do this in the belief that, once they've pushed it to the contractor, it ceases to exist. But, there are some risks which government is better placed to manage. And, that's often the case with things around planning, for instance, and other things around the government's own organisation. And it's just useless to try and pile all of that risk onto the contractor if they're not the ones who are going to be in control of it. They may take it on, but they'll charge you for it, and it won't be value for money.
Yeah, and they may not be the best party to actually deal with it. I mean, you can argue that there are examples of the opposite as well, where the railway organization takes on board risk that they are not best placed to deal with. Yeah, I'm thinking of system integration, management of certain interfaces and things like this, where you said, that should have been better left to a supplier, or to a contractor that really knows about the technology much better and is much more involved in the actual realization of that interface, right? Number 6, design the right procurement process. Well, that sounds so obvious that you're always almost wondering why is it written down in the first place, but yeah, you will explain.
Well,
that.
again, it's what we were just it was what we were just talking about with the signaling procurement, that it's not the obvious thing to do to have 2 separate projects with 2 separate suppliers, but in the context of the overall needs for the wider project of delivering a signalling improvement, that was a good call. And it's not that you're totally inventing the wheel on procurement. You still need to stick with the basic principles, but each mega project does have. I know there's a buzz going around at the moment about mega projects are not unique, and they're not truly unique. Everyone has similarities to others, but nonetheless, they are a one-off that you need to have the right process for that particular project.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one thing which may be a bit novel for procurement that I've seen again in the signaling space, if you're using these new signaling technologies or these advanced digital signaling technologies, the railway locks themselves in much more with a single supplier. I mean, not so much in that ETCS example where interoperability between two suppliers was exactly for mitigating that issue. But if you look at Sydney Metro, for instance, where you have a technology which by default is not interoperable, the railway basically locks themselves in with one supplier for the entire line or for everything that's connected with that line. And what I think is needed there is not just the contract for the initial delivery. You also need a second contract for ongoing technology support and maintenance and midlife software upgrades, all these kind of stuff. And that was still relatively understandable, and I think there's a third contract needed that gives the railway some kind of price certainty for future extensions. And when you don't do that, you basically open yourself up to, you're becoming very vulnerable as the railway organization for later price hikes when you are in a situation that you can't really get away from that supplier. You basically have to buy whatever they offer you at whatever price they choose to give you.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and to some extent you can only solve it from Australia by adopting standards in Europe or elsewhere where interoperability is written into the standard. Not necessarily totally effectively, but nonetheless, if you're going with a product which is at least supposed to be interoperable, you're in with a better chance.
Yeah. Number 7, consult, full stop, properly, full stop.
Yeah, well, a lot of government organizations know they're supposed to consult, but if you're doing proper consultation, you're actually expecting to learn something from the people that you consult with, which means that you may then do something different as a result. And you really have to, build into your process not just a period where we're going out to consultation, but also a period where, and now we're going to decide what we're going to do with what we learned from the consultation. And too often consultation is simply well, let's go out and tell the market what we've decided we're going to do, and we won't listen when they tell us it's the wrong thing.
One of the quotes here, I've written down a few quotes from your book, which I found hilarious. And one of them is, listen to what they tell you, especially if it's not something you want to hear.
Yeah.
I think that summarizes it in a nutshell, that sometimes the advice you're getting from consultants is not entirely matching your own viewpoint, but I think that's the very point of bringing a consultant in, that they may have experience that differs from yours because they have seen more of the stuff that can go wrong and hopefully can guide you in a more positive direction. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not always right, but they're always worth taking seriously.
Yeah. Number 8, insist on good governance.
Yeah, well.
Yes, yeah. What can you say? What I really liked about it was that you put yourself, when you wrote it or how you wrote it, you put yourself in the shoes of the project director, which was kind of the role that you had for the
Yeah.
Veritas, for example, and to say, you know what, you actually need a good governance structure to cover your own backside. Plus, you can
Yep.
use it as leverage to get support from the higher echelons of the organization. So basically making clear that a project director should should really insist, as you say, insist on good governance. So if there are issues in the governance structure, then you basically, as a project director, have to fight for a better system. And also how to engage your stakeholders. I mean, you said, well, don't do boring steering committee meetings, because then people get
Yep.
disinterested. Yeah, well, spot on. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there is actually a lot that can go wrong, especially in governance, because often, especially when you talk about introducing new technology, you just don't have the right skill sets in the room. The cohort of people from which you normally recruit your governance structure, which is like, for example, the executive committee of the railway organization, something like that, if none of them has ever done something like this before, where do you get the capabilities from? Unless you bring external people in that, I don't know, give advice or have an opinion on that or something like that. And yeah.
Well, and you can do that. I've actually Hydro Tasmania, which is about to embark on a very large power station refurbishment and redevelopment, has done just that. They've brought in a couple of consultants to spend a bit of time with the project, one of whom is an international hydro engineer expert, and the other one is me, on the governance side. But that's, a very sensible approach, that if you don't have enough expertise in-house, there's a load of expertise out there. Tap into some of it.
Yeah. Number 9, distinguish between price and value for money.
What can I say?
Yeah. I can see how this is something that can go very often wrong, and we discussed it before in this conversation, so we just leave it standing there. And number 10, which is probably a great wrap up, acknowledge your own fallibility.
Yeah. As I said before, nobody can do everything on one of these projects. It's inevitable that at some point in what is a 2 years at least, probably setting the thing up, at some point you're going to make a mistake, you're going to make a poor judgment, and you've just got to be able to recognize that will happen from time to time. And when it does, you want to have cultivated an atmosphere where people will tell you, hey, Louise, that was a really dumb thing to do. And you need to have people around you who will tell you these things, and they need to have the confidence that they won't get shot if they deliver a difficult message. And that sort of culture within a project team where people can acknowledge a mistake and set about fixing it is just critical to the whole process.
Yes. All right, I think that wraps it up quite beautifully. I would like to commend you again for that book. I think it has been an important book, and I'm particularly pleased that it now, with the paperback version, comes into a price range that is a bit more affordable than, I must say, when I bought it at the time and back in 2017, I was choking a bit on the price, but then I thought, well, when do you get the opportunity to get it hand signed by the author? So I just bit the bullet and got it. But I really hope that with the paperback version, there is an opportunity for more people getting it and reading it and putting it on their shelf, and then hopefully picking it up again when it gets into the next procurement process, because I think it can only do good, even if people don't apply 100% of it, but only the odd tip there. Yeah, so I wish you all the best of success for that book and its wider contribution. It would be really good, would be really helpful, I think, to the industry.
Thank you very much, Frank. It's been good talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Louise. Have a good day. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share. And until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.